Hello and welcome to the Cost of Everything podcast by CostViz. I'm your host Amritpal and I'm here to bring you the best and most useful content around data analysis, visualization and communication. On the Cost of Everything podcast, I talk to the brightest, best and most innovative minds in the world of cost, data visualization and communication, asking questions that will help us all to communicate better through the cost data we create. Have you ever noticed how when you try and tell a story through the analysis you've created, often it's misinterpreted or the stories don't really hit home? And that's why I'm starting this podcast, to help build a community of cost professionals, analysts, estimators, able to better visualize data, improve how we present, or even how we tell the story. So if you're watching on YouTube, welcome. This is a new format for me. Like all YouTubers, I'd like you to smash that subscribe button, hit like, and drop a comment on your key thoughts around the episode. If you're listening in on the podcast, you can always watch YouTube later. Each month, I'll bring a new guest to discuss key themes or topics around data communication, analysis, and other areas linked to cost communication. In between, there'll be additional content on YouTube, the Patreon page, which is free to join by the way, and on LinkedIn. All the links are going to be in the description below. On today's episode, I get to share with you an interview I did with data visualization expert Andy Kirk. I had Andy's book on data visualization for years, and he just so happens to be releasing the latest edition of that book this year. We talk about Andy's journey into data viz, its growing importance to all professionals, using charts and visuals to tell the data story, and principles around data viz. Then, for Patreon members only, more of a deep dive on data visualization techniques and its application. And in this one, we talk specifically about tree maps and their application. Oh, and just before we get started, my good friends at ICEA and SCAF are holding a brilliant training symposium right in the heart of London on the 19th and 20th of September. It's truly international, with the opportunity to listen to some insightful talks, to network with your fellow professionals from around the world, and to really find out about the cutting edge methods, practices and approaches to estimating and cost analysis. Get your tickets by visiting the ICEA website. Links are in the description. And yes, I'll be there. I'll look forward to seeing you all. Thanks for tuning in. And here is that chat with Andy Kirk. Thank you, Andy, for joining me on this first episode.
Thank you very much. What a pleasure. Number one guest. It can only get better from here, let's say.
Yeah, start. Well, hopefully it'll be start as you mean to go on. So let's start actually with the first question in the interview. So this section we're going to talk about everything as much as we can with the time that we've got allotted to us. But we're going to start, on the journey to data visualization mastery. We'll go deep into the structure of data storytelling, and then we'll talk a little bit more about the various things that you're doing. There's obviously the latest edition of the book as well. Hopefully we'll get to as well. And some additional content, which if you're on YouTube, you might not get. I'm probably going to put it on Patreon initially, but you can join on Patreon. Again, the details will be down in the description below. So, first question, if you take us back, Andy, to the beginning of your journey in data visualization, what really sparked your interest in this?
Yeah. I mean, let's go back in time thinking really be traced back to being a child. And I won't take that long to answer the question, but as a kid I had a very kind of prolonged enjoyment of both maths and art, and wanted to be an architect. Never got the chance due to a shortcoming in the physics side of all this. But when I started working, my early careers were in kind of classic spreadsheet analysis type roles, management information for the police force, for universities. So I was always working with data. I was always doing kind of stats and graphs and presentations of that data, but never really knew that there was a subject or a discipline or a craft behind it. And then just by chance, 2007, you talked about a spark. There was a genuine spark. I found on the web discourse and arguments about this subject called information visualization, and it was this wow moment of there's a name for this stuff. There's a subject. There are people talking about it. There's white papers. There's examples. There's all this cool stuff out there, and it was just a genuine moment of, well, this is what I want to do when I grow up. The thing is, I was already 30, so I'd done the growing up already. So this was more like, this could be where, I don't know, the second act of my career goes. And then, I guess, long story short, I had the chance to do a master's while working at the University of Leeds as a member of staff, and I could design that master's around a proposal for a kind of what's called an MRes, a master's through research. And I just basically managed to, in a sense, manufacture a proposal around data viz, because it was linked to the day job, but it gave me a chance to say, right, for the next 2 years, I'm going to study this subject. And then that unlocked a passion. I had to continue learning. I had to find a way to make this my thing. Start the website, started blogging, because if you write about something publicly, you're kind of forced to develop a conviction and a clarity and kind of know what you're talking about. And from there, a few opportunities arose. And again, longer story short, I thought, well, there's a need to do something about this commercially, professionally. Went sort of part-time freelance, and then from there had the confidence to jump into full-time freelancing, and that was back in 2011. So about 13 years that I've been doing this, and keep every day pinching myself that I get a chance to do this for a living, because it's still something that excites me and gives me a passion today.
Yeah, no, definitely. It does come through in sort of, like you said, I've attended your training sessions. I've seen your podcasts as well. Which feel free to plug as well, of course, because that will
Why
be
not?
massive support for the viewers and the listeners as well. But it's quite interesting as well, because I think I had after wanting to be an astronaut from the age of 5 until age of reason, then I wanted to be an architect as well. Mine was the other way around. I had the physics, but I wasn't so artistic. So,
right.
We
should have joined forces and covered all the gaps then.
Definitely. There's still time. You never know. So, I mean, it's fascinating because, like I said, from such, shall we say, humble beginnings to a place now where you are widely recognized as an expert and as a person of significance in the world of data visualization. And the world has changed as well alongside that. So the field has evolved quite quickly to be recognized as a field, whereas before it wasn't seen as something like that. It was seen as part of maybe almost not a sideshow. I don't want to put it down, but it wasn't really at the forefront of people's minds. So
no, absolutely.
So how have you? So I mean, well, we can talk about that evolution as well. But I guess just specifically within the context of some of the organisations you've worked with, we mentioned sort of Apple, the EU Council, and the Arsenal. What were the common challenges, and what was your role in trying to resolve the issues that the companies were facing?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a useful sort of jumping point from the previous comment about the growth of the field and indeed the establishing of a field, because I'm really fortunate to have got into this when I did, because I've kind of ridden the wave and risen through the wave of the growth and the mainstreaming of this subject. And in a sense, that's the characteristics of these organisations that you mentioned, that they were a little bit behind the curve in their journeys in different ways. So Apple, my work there in this context was to help advise on the development of a dashboard that they were using to monitor some of their App Store data. And when we say App Store data, we're talking millions of data points and transactions. But you'd kind of think from the outside that they would already have this, they would already be on top of this stuff. But they've got so much they need to be on top of that this just hadn't come round yet to their sort of top of the to-do list. And so what we wanted to try and do there is to try and develop a dashboard that had this kind of fulsome of different perspectives that helped you understand markets and different transactions. It's the kind of classic sales database in a sense. But we wanted to do something that, there's a bit of pressure in when you're working with Apple. It needs to feel like it's got that stamp of Apple design flair, and that's carried on internally. The EU Council, I did lots of training courses with, and that was on the back of their, I don't know who it was, a very senior person in the organisation in one meeting saying we need to become more visual. And for some reason, this fella had clout, and everyone seemed to have heard this comment in this massive meeting. I don't know if it's like an annual conference or something, and have panicked. And then everyone gone, what does this mean? What do we do to make ourselves more visual culturally? And so they panicked and dragged me into to do some courses to sort of teach them about the literacy and the approaches to visualizing data. Now, in a way, what they also needed to look at was bringing light to things that were invisible. And so one of the case studies that I talk about like my course was to visualize a big body of text and document, a very dull document about fisheries negotiations. But what they were characteristically looking to do was to create clarity out of complexity. So these multi-page documents with all sorts of nuances about you want to fish for more, you want to fish for fewer. They wanted that to be seen and seeable in a single document. And so when this guy wanted to, inject a greater visual culture, it was things like that. It wasn't just charting. It wasn't just more bar charts. It was to think differently about all this understanding that's kind of, at the moment, in potential, is locked away, is invisible, is hard to access. So that was about trying to both demonstrate what can be done, but also inject in the staff their own solutions, their own motivation to sort of take this on board. The old metaphor of giving a person a fishing rod versus giving them a fish. And then for Arsenal, it was, again, their culture compared to other Premier League clubs was quite advanced in terms of data-driven or data augmented understanding. Not to replace the skills of a trainer or a coach, but to augment that. And they were looking to really build on the good work they've done to get more data, to gather more data, to have more infrastructure on the data side, and the intelligence about what they want to do with it, but not quite sure how. And so I went in there to help with, in a sense, sort of setting up visual routines that I could then hand over to the sports scientists, the analysts, and say, right, here's a good practice solution. It's now set up for you to run every day, every match, whatever it may be. So kind of different situations, but all characterizing the desire to make the complex clear, to advance their cultural or visual techniques, but also fundamentally to recognize that from the outside you can come into these things with an idealistic view of really creative, really ambitious visual solutions, but there's a need for these things to be reproducible and handoverable. And so that was a key learning point for me. I had these great ambitions of making an impression, but actually it probably needs to be a bar chart. So it's also that balance out between pragmatism and idealism that they were looking for, and I had to adapt to in the kind of advice that I gave.
Perfect. That's really interesting, because there is a functional element, of course, to producing these visualizations, and it kind of just takes me back to, what is the fundamental purpose of a visualization, and it's to take that it's that epistemic uncertainty, things that we know that we don't know.
Yeah.
In what might be something that is inaccessible, if it's a block of text or it's a table that is not communicating what it needs to, and making that available to as many people as possible in a format that then allows it to go from epistemic uncertainty to actual knowledge, because that's ultimately what it's supposed to be doing. So it's really interesting that's kind of almost like a common set of problems that I'd say we have that there's academics who have that as a major challenge as well. And the humble bar chart is obviously often looked at as
it's the hero,
but
it's the hero of the field. It does all the heavy lifting. But I mean, another key point, I've talked there about the high end tech part of the industry. You've got NGOs and you've got sports teams, very different organizational context. But you could take off the labels of the work that I produced in each place, and you wouldn't really know what the methods were applied to. Is that a sport related chart? Is that a tech related chart? Is that something to do with NGO? Because this is communication. Charts and visuals are communications of topics, and you don't need to make it look like the topic for it to work. A bar chart is a bar chart. An area chart is an area chart. So one of the key things I often advise people who are getting into this is look beyond your industry, look beyond your domain, because a solution that's completely about something different, like COVID, is still going to have analytical, creative, design learnings that you can apply to your work, even if your work is completely different topic. It still might be about how things change over time, how things break down by category. These are common data questions. The meaning's unique, but the way that we communicate it is not.
Absolutely interesting. And so talk to I would say my next question here, because there are some preconceived notions that I know I came to the training with. And if you're say a specialist in data analytics, or you've got a specialism in a particular field, you might have seen things presented in a particular way. So I guess it's partly what I'm asking here, but how is your approach to teaching data visualization evolved? There's the teaching in the classes, but you also are a visiting lecturer at UCL, and you've also got your Explore Explain series, which it's not necessarily the same kind of teaching environment. It's almost like self-learning as well as and sharing the learning through discussion, almost like we're doing now. In fact, I'm hoping very similar to what we're doing now. But how's your teaching evolved over the years?
It's an interesting question. It's a different context, but you mentioned before that I'm working on a new edition of the book, and I approached that with a relative complacent mindset, thinking, there'll be nothing that I need to change. I'll just change a few words, a few typos, a couple of fresh graphics, and it'll be done in a week. And
I can keep this. Okay, I can keep this one then.
You can keep it for now until I eventually get this one, because actually I've done a lot of changes, and it's exposed me to realizing that actually I have changed a lot in how I might express things and how I might, deconstruct something that's complex into different taxonomies or acronyms or whatever it may be. And I think what's characterized my changes is perhaps moving away gradually from some of the more sort of dogmatic rights and wrongs or do's and don'ts that are sometimes, don't get me wrong, sometimes it's what people need in the audience of a course they want that sort of safety zone of always do this and never do that. But because I've had all these experiences working with clients where they always do this and never do that, doesn't sort of survive in a real world context, I've tried to adapt to become more flexible, more adaptable in my teaching. And in a sense, rather than prescribe to people, thou wilt do this, it's more, here are the things that you're going to need to think about. Here are the things that you're going to face in terms of options. And here's how you might make choices given your unique circumstances that I can't predict and you can't predict what you might face. But I'm going to give you the almost the methodology to be able to adapt to whatever encounters, and leave you then with that sort of fingertip judgment of, in my situation, for this subject, for this data, for this analysis, for that audience, blah, 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 I think this is the right choice to make. And because everything ultimately is down to subjective choices, there's no chart that is objective. It might be based on reasonable data and evidence, but your choices of how to show it and what to include or not include is down to you. But it's also about trade-offs and compromises. You could do that, you could do that. Toss of a coin, let's go for this. So I've tried to adapt my teaching to recognize more what the real world practice of data viz looks like, and not try and cheat in a way, and to reduce it to an oversimplistic treatment that somebody in a course might go, great, I've got all these nice sort of bits of scaffolding to hang off, and then they go back to the workplace and go, yeah, that rule doesn't quite stand up to how this situation I'm working with is kind of revealing nuances and challenges and uncertainties. So I think that would be the biggest change that I've maybe not even realised I've made, but certainly is what's manifested.
It's really interesting, and just on that, because there's, I was thinking back to the other participants in the training, and it was a very diverse sort of range of, there's a whole range of us, different industries, different professions. Have you noticed more sort of either more specialisms joining or more professions joining training sessions where they link on to data visualization now compared with before?
Absolutely. And to be honest, that's why I love those courses so much, those kind of public events, because it does invite people from all different backgrounds and sensibilities to come to a class. And I don't need to force that. It just is the case. It's the case that in most people's duties these days, in all industries, in all sectors, all shapes, sizes, locations, there's a need for you to have a literacy with data and be able to grasp it, to present it to different degrees. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that everyone is now 100% data viz people, but even if it's just, I don't know, like an expected 5% of your duties, it's kind of whetted the appetite for those people to try and work out how to do that 5% of their job better. Because you can dabble, you can learn a bit off your own kind of direction, but it's one of those things that, I mean, it's easy for the trainer to say this, but it's one of those things that I do feel if you point it in the right direction, then you've got a better chance of succeeding. And so when people kind of find that connection to the subject, of course, hopefully it addresses those 5% of their duties. But I do find that people really want to then push further into not so much specializing in this, but certainly getting more and more into it, because, let's face it, it is a subject that does have a degree of novelty, because it is creative, it's visual, it's colourful, it's different, it's novel, and so there is that sense that it's a little bit of an open goal in terms of selling the kind of potential excitement for getting into it. And you're right, I find it so rewarding to come across the range of people that do come to these courses, because it is every flavour of person, and that enriches the experience for everyone in attendance. And it also usually exposes differences. People have different views. People come at this from a largely kind of statistical, mathematical background, may come with a different lens to those who have got more of an artistic leaning. But then there are, the Venn diagram where you kind of join in the centre to have those kind of intersections and commonalities.
No, definitely. That's one of the things I found really interesting about the course. And I guess, and the other side of it is that we have a lot of challenges, I would say, in sort of maybe cost analysis, cost estimating world, where you're presenting, here's the results. That basically what people are interested in is, when you boil it down to it, is how much it's going to cost. And what you need to be able to do is help them to be very clear in understanding, this is what we're costing, this is what we mean, this is the scope of what we're talking about. And these are, what you can't do is present all the analysis that you've done, all the background information, all the, all the scenarios you've run, all the various assumptions you put in, what you are including, what you're excluding. You have to answer questions of, it depends. And invariably what happens is you get a summary report where the results presented, and usually it's in the form of a table. You might get a waterfall chart or something, or you'll definitely get a bar chart. As I said, that's always a superstar, but you don't get that underlying. Okay, so when someone has a question for you on what does that number mean, there's that two or three-way communication where you can't then confirm their understanding, because sometimes they might not be able to understand what you've written down, and they can't, there's no way of them sort of understanding what does this actually mean for us. And there's a lot of movement now towards, 4D modeling and 5D modeling and 6D modeling. I didn't know there were so many dimensions, but these are things that, trying to visualize as well as communicate the underlying data. So it's undoubtedly, given all these tools that are available to us now, all these different ways of we producing, visualization, visuals. I still rely heavily on Excel, started, with Power BI as well now, and PowerPoint, of course. But, we know that data storytelling is becoming sort of increasingly a more important area in a diverse range of professions, not least cost, and the analysis that we present. How do you see, and it links back to the previous question I just asked, but how do you see that evolving, and how do you see professionals sort of developing skills in cost cost? We could talk cost specifically if you've got any experience specifically around cost, but just generally around data as well. And how do you see those professions adopting practices from data visualization?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you described there is characteristic of people. Let's not be wrong about this. Everyone does everything with good intent. If you show all your workings and give somebody all your data, you're not doing it intentionally to obscure things or to overwhelm them. You just don't know any better, and you also don't know any better in the sense of we've always been told from schooling, show all your workings. In academics context, always show the error bars and the footnotes and the caveats and the evidence for where all this has come from. And yes, there's a time and place for all that. But in most everyday circumstances, we need to not just abdicate responsibility by saying, right, here's all the material, I'm just going to pass it over to you. We need to explain things. So when we talk about the notion of data storytelling, it's really kind of couched in this idea of not just showing data and displaying data, but doing it in a way that explains things, that points things out, that unpacks a complicated or complex story bit by bit. And so that we're not this kind of onslaught of everything in one single go. We can gradually unveil what's actually the context, the situation, the parts of the story, and then the kind of key insights. So it's not a natural way that a lot of people find it easy to sort of detach themselves from the heavy duty, heavy lifting of a spreadsheet work that they've gone through, all these different formulae and index tables that they've looked up and all these things that they've kind of carefully prepared. But it does require a mindset of detachment and to say, right, step back. So given all the things that I could show, what will I show? And that to me is the essence of good visualization, irrespective of the tools that you're using. Having that clarity of what understanding it is that you want your audience to get from this is everything in data viz. Because we can show everything, but we shouldn't show everything in most cases. And so whether you've got something as limiting, and I prefer to use kind of inverted commas for that, as limiting as PowerPoint, you've still got loads of things you can do. Because think about the essence of a slide deck. If you've got a simple line chart showing some cost values changing over time for different categories, let's say, or what you might do over a series of 5 slides, let's say, is first slide is just an empty chart, and you can explain, here's what the y-axis represents, here's the time frame, and here's the subject. Right, slide number 2, we're going to reveal one line. And that one line might be an expected line, a line with an expected shape. We all thought this would go up, it's gone up. And then the second one, we're going to reveal 2 more lines. Oh, look, they've gone down. Never expected that. And then the third one is another sub-story. So you're kind of gradually unveiling the story. Rather than just saying, here's a line chart, see you later, you are sort of telling a story. Now, whether you do it through a presentation and you stood there pointing things out, or if it's in a word report, just, again, think about like a comic strip. Panel 1 will show the context. Panel 2 will be the next line. So even in relatively limiting tools, we can still bring into this thinking of communication the notion of a story, even on just a line chart. So we're all capable of doing this because this is how we communicate in daily life and talk to friends and family and tell stories to each other. We can do that to visualization and do that upon otherwise complicated technical topics like the costs of things, but just realize that the audience is human, we're human, so let's try and find a bridge that gets us both on the same page.
Now, that's a really interesting point. And I'm just trying to think back to some of the presentations that I've given where there's an assumed level of knowledge, and then there's this that there's only very brief sort of periods of editorial thinking or design of what I'm doing. You just kind of go into what you're doing, and then you try and
you go through the motions.
You go through the motions. You sort of muddle your way through, and then when you're looking back on it or to edit it, it's less about the structure of it. It's less about what the way you're presenting it. You know, that almost peeling away of the onion. It's more a case of, okay, I've got all the information now, right? Okay, I think that will do. Let me send it off, or let me present it.
You're absolutely right. In fact, today I've just been writing about this in the book about this. You talked about editorial thinking, which is, in my view, it's everything in data viz, and it's the least technical thing, least creative thing. It's just judgments. But the example I've got is a line chart of sort of sales by source. So is it websites, stores, telephone sales, that sort of thing. And you could use a line chart to show trends over time, or you could break it down into proportion of sales year by year. So this year, 45% came from online. This next year, 45% came from apps. Or you could look at the spread to find out when was the outlier, when was the typical, what was the average. All these are different legitimate views of the same data, but answer different questions. Now, you may have a reason to show all three views simultaneously to give an all-round perspective to the audience of, what's the real kind of collective story, not just one slice of it. But in many occasions, we have to make a judgment. We can't show everything all the time, as I said before. So on this occasion, I think the trend over time is actually the most relevant thing. There are other things available that I could show the audience, but in this context, I'm going to be editorially discerning about not showing that, not trying to show that. And that is difficult because we get very precious. When we start to analyze data, we look around it from all perspectives. We think, well, that chart looks interesting to me and that chart looks interesting to me. Others must also share that interest. It's not always the case. So being selective, it's not a malicious act of denying people access to charts. It's not saying, I'm going to keep this secret from you and sort of distort your knowledge about a subject. It's just being selective. I've only got a 5-minute window to get your attention, to tell you something, and I've got 20 people to tell. I have to be kind of discerning in the choices of what to show and what not to show. And that, to me, is the biggest difference maker anyone can make in their data viz practice, is that clarity of editorial thinking.
No, that's really, really interesting. And then it ties in with another set of principles or the principles that you have around sort of trustworthiness, accessibility, and elegance. And these have come through as key themes, I guess, in the book. And they're also key themes that you brought out in the training sessions as well. And I guess, could you elaborate a little bit on what these three elements are and sort of how they affect data visualization?
I mean, I call them principles, and you could equally switch that out for things like values in a way. What are my values as a data communicator? Trustworthiness it's not about truthfulness, which should be an assumed basic. Trust is about the perception that the audience has towards your work. Can they trust the integrity of the content, its accuracy, its faithfulness, its thoroughness, its comprehensiveness? But can they also trust the accuracy of how it's been portrayed? There are all sorts of ways with different charts that we can mislead, manipulate, distort, whether we intend to or not. You can have the most beautiful, understandable chart in the world, but if it's based on junk, or in the eyes of the audience, junk, there's no point in existing. So we talked just there about showing workings and including caveats. And it can be easy to dismiss that stuff Some of that stuff may be important to earn the trust of an audience that by default doesn't have that trust earned, or you've not earned the trust with them. Sometimes you need to build this up. And this is why it's all trade-offs. Accessibility is about unimpeded access to understanding. So what we mean by this is it's not so much an issue of trusting something, but do I understand it? Is it confusing? Do I know what those colours represent? Do I know what the basis of the calculation is? Not because I don't trust it, but I just need to know so that I can then interpret what it's saying. So unimpeded access does not mean everything has to be quick, simple, and easy. There are moments when that's important. It's about making sure things are as clear as they can be, that they take no more effort than is necessary, that they take no more time than is necessary. Some things will be technical, complex, complicated, and if it takes a few minutes to grasp it, that's probably quite proportional to the subject it portrays. And then elegance, in some respects, is a bonus, but we need to try and make things look visually appealing. We need to make sure that our design choices are thorough and refined and the attention to detail, because the audience is humans and people like nice things. So you can make a bar chart attractive basically by ignoring the defaults in Excel, because the defaults in Excel are busy, cluttered, bold, loud, shouting, everything's at the same level. Turn things off, make things quieter, only have labels when you need to have labels. Think carefully about which scales to include. What's the useful title? Not just number of units of widgets plotted by category. Say something. Give the audience an immediate takeaway. Use subtle greys, not just blacks everywhere, so that things are quiet but still visible. So elegance is less important than the others, but I do think it's a universal thing that we should at least aspire towards, but not at the cost of trustworthiness and its accessibility.
Yeah, so I mean, the accessible one is very interesting. I think if you're, a lot of the audience will probably be cost professionals, for example, and there's a couple of areas where you might say, is that accessible? And also I'd say there's probably questions, not the trustworthiness element. Again, not that should we trust the data or should we trust that you're telling the story that the data's saying or what the data's saying, but more, it probably does more tie up to the accessibility, to be honest, because it's often either commercially sensitive or it's industry specific, or you're a technical person and you're trying to tell someone who's non-technical or from a different technical background, what this data is telling them. There's some specific challenges, I would say, to communicating what cost data is telling us for useful decisions. And the useful decisions I'm thinking of are, investment cases or business planning, or, if you're in design space and you're telling someone, actually, if you design, a booster rocket to be X meters high and X meters in diameter, it's going to cost a lot more than if you just halve it, or maybe if you just reduce it in size slightly. And communicating that data in a way where the engineer doesn't just tell you to go away because you don't know what you're talking about, or no, I have to design it in this way for a particular reason. It sometimes brings up new questions on, actually, how do I design this more specifically for a particular audience, or can I generalize this data?
You're absolutely right. It's accessible to whom, and that's why it's so important for you to work out who that target recipient is, or the likely recipient is, and shape so many of your choices around their anticipated or known needs and their knowledge and the situation in which they encounter the work. So again, accessibility is something that might be, they've only got a fleeting encounter to get across a message, in which case things have to be simple and quick. But if it's to an engineer that you're going to sit down with for 30 minutes and go through lots of different levels of detail, then a detailed visualization is not just appropriate, but actually required. And so you're absolutely right. And that's when we talk about the "it depends" phrase as, frankly, the most boring, repetitive thing that we have to espousing this world, that's kind of what it depends upon, who's the other end of this kind of communication exchange.
Yeah, definitely agree with that. And a lot of challenges. And then the other challenge around making it elegant is again, there's a lot of subjectivity about what elegance might be and your particular viewpoint, and almost seeing I always used to get this saying wrong, but the wood from the trees and the wood from the leaves, or the wood from the trees, wood from the trees.
I think it's that. Trees, yeah.
Yeah. and because you might be so in the detail of what you're doing that sometimes that editorial thinking is, you're not able to abstract yourself from it and actually then say, what does my audience need? I don't know whether it was, whether you said this during training, but almost like, killing your darlings because you want to present it. You might have found this newfangled way of presenting like a donut chart or something. And you say, I could do this, and this, and then and removing yourself from that situation to say, actually, there's no need. No one's going to care about that. And no one's going to you're not going to be able to get anything from that information presented in that way.
Well, that's it. And again, it's about that discipline. And it just reminds me of the book chapter I wrote on Friday, I think it was. And I'd reminded myself of the word perfunctory. And I was kind of obsessed with the need to try and find a way to put in the word perfunctory. And I put it in a sentence, then stepped away and came back to it and thought, just get rid of it. Why would you force the need to use a word just because you've got excited about this extra vocabulary? And that's kind of the parallels with data viz. You get excited about a different way to show data. It doesn't mean to say that you should use it all the time. And you have to kind of have that discipline to not get too excitable. Separately practice, use it, practice, and work out when it should be deployed in your repertoire of methods. But just using it for the sake of using something that's different and novel isn't really sufficient rationale for choice making.
I guess just to wrap this section up and just wrap up what we're talking about here. In my mind, what we've talked about is something that can be learned systematically. It's a process. So if you're from a technical background or a design background or an artistic background, you're used to, setting up and going through a process, whether that's outlined clearly or, defined rigidly. So for me, it kind of brings a lot of opportunities for people who maybe are, I would say, that sometimes, sort of some most technical backgrounds are very limited in what they will allow in terms of creative expression. But I think it's a really useful avenue for that creative expression, to really add some color, let's say, to a profession. So I guess, just to let's finish this one up by saying just thank you, first of all, for joining me on the show today.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
But I'd really like you to take a minute or two just to tell everyone about the various things coming up. We've mentioned the book. We've not even talked about the newsletter that you're doing, the other training sessions. I know you're collaborating on various things with other visualization experts. So, we'll probably not capture everything, but
no.
Please take a minute just to talk about the various things.
Thank you. Yeah. I mean, doing a lot of different things is kind of what keeps my energy, and all the different things and pursuits kind of feed into each other. So the training course will be made better by doing the book, and the book will hopefully sell copies that then get people to think, maybe we'll get a guy in to do a training course. So I've got a training course similar to the one that you attended in February, but that will be in April in London, 2-day masterclass. Again, it's my favorite delivery of a course when it's a public event, and it's super to meet everyone who attends. The podcast, I'm resuming myself. It's the Explore, Explain series where I interview data viz designers, developers, journalists to learn about the backstory and the hidden behind the scenes thinking that goes into one of their major projects, to learn about all these little details and decisions that they kind of reconcile. The newsletter is brand new, but it's reflective of the era that we're in, where there's a bit of a fragmentation in social media. So this is a bit more of a push out of a resurrected thing I used to do all the time. Every month for about 12 years, I'd round up the best data viz content from the last month. And then it grew beyond proportion, couldn't keep on top of it, stopped it. And then I now have resumed it. So every month I'm sending out the 50 to try and cope. the 50 best things I've seen, whether it's new examples, works, articles, learning resources, to give people perhaps not as fortunate as I am, who have been around the field for a long time, who kind of know all the people to kind of keep track of. This is the sort of monthly digest of what's happened. And then, the other big thing, of course, is the book, and that'll be hopefully done by Easter. And possibly, if I don't delay any longer, will be out by sort of late autumn this year.
Gosh, exciting times. And 50 data visualizations is that's a good effort to gather that much. But then again, they are very interesting to look at. So, and also, of course, we've got your website as well, which is visualizingdata.com. And you've got a special website, haven't you, for the newsletter as well attached to that? So
there's a separate page that kind of not just shows you how to sign up, but also if you can't sign up, some people don't have an email system compatible. There's a web archive of the equivalent newsletter contents that's on there sort of 2 weeks after the newsletter goes out on email.
Perfect. So I think we can bring the YouTube and the podcast interview to a close. So thank you very much for joining me on the show today, Andy.
Thank you, my pleasure.
And that's the end of this week's episode. We'll be back for more next month with another very special guest. Remember to subscribe to the YouTube channel, sign up to Patreon. Don't miss out on all the great content. I want to grow this channel and to build a real community for cost professionals around the world. Leave a comment, share your thoughts. Thanks again for listening, and until next time,